I imagine a lot of organizations have not thought enough about the importance of diplomacy and the long-term game, and being very focused on what needs to happen now. So I think some groups may think, oh, we're just here to put pressure at all costs, and
Yes.
not thinking about, okay, what if we have to meet them in 6 months' time, or in 1 year's time, or in 3 or 4 years' time? I mean, we have a few examples with companies that don't want to meet with us just because we started a campaign that we even thought was fair, but the company didn't. If we had like more of a pattern of switching targets all the time, we might find ourselves in a situation where there's so many companies we couldn't talk to. We see it, unfortunately, quite a bit in Poland where we work, because for quite many years we have not paid enough attention to these dynamics. So the tone has been a bit more harsh, a bit more rough. And a lot of companies are like, we don't really want to deal with you, or they're being like, we don't really trust you. And trust is a little bit like muscle. It's very slow to gain and very, very fast to lose.
My guest today is Thorbjørn Schiønning, also known as Toby, who is the Director of Communications and Campaigns, as well as being the co-founder of Anima International. He's been involved in animal rights for over 15 years, specializing in corporate outreach, campaigning, and media work. And some of his hobbies include games like chess, poker, and backgammon, including, I believe, playing at a backgammon world championship. And we discuss why these set of hobbies might be relevant for campaigners at the end of today's conversation. We speak about the recent huge success for chickens in Norway, where the Norwegian chicken industry has agreed to phase out fast-growing broiler breeds, which will affect over 70 million animals per year by the end of 2027. And this is the first time a country anywhere in the world has taken such major action to help chickens raise for meat. And I think even more importantly, we spend a bunch of time discussing Anima International strategy when it comes to corporate campaigning, and why they've come up with a new term, which they call fair cop, and why they feel this is a better approach to the well-known concepts of good cop and bad cop. And Toby has lots of interesting tidbits, advice, and tactics for anyone who's interested in campaigning and advocacy, such as why threatening big campaigns can actually be counterproductive to your long-term success, why more campaign groups should be building a war chest of campaigning funds, why most campaigners should wait longer and spend more time negotiating before escalating, and much, much more. Today, I just learned a lot about corporate campaigning strategy, and this is coming at a really critical time for the movement, both in our cage-free efforts as well as our broiler welfare efforts. So I hope you all enjoy this and find it useful. Toby, thanks so much for joining. Nice to have you on.
Thank you, James. I'm happy to be here.
The first question we like to ask everyone is, what's something you changed your mind on recently and why?
Yes, I had to think a little, but I came up with Stop the Farms concept, which probably many are familiar with, the idea of stopping new factory farms from being built. I think when I heard of it the first time, I was very much in favor of it, but now I also see a lot of drawbacks to it. One instance is if you talk about improving broiler chicken welfare, one of the asks that we have is that we want broilers to be slower growing strains, and we want them to have more space. And if we want that, then actually more farms are needed in order to house the birds. Otherwise, we're working against ourselves, on the one hand saying we want higher welfare, and on the other hand saying that there shouldn't be houses for the animals to be housed. So I think that's a point where I've changed my mind, thinking that it's not helping so much. And also there's an element of playing tag, that we're just being very reactive in the way that we work and not really having our own things that we want to change, but we just want to be a stick in the wheel, so to speak.
Yeah, kind of whack-a-mole. If something comes up, you try stop it and something else, and then do you do this forever? And it's like a game of cat and mouse. Yeah, it's not clear.
Yeah, and it seems not reasonable that we would be able to do that everywhere in the world, regardless. So it seems like we can spend a lot of resources just seeing where we can do like some things here and there, but not really having a broader window of how we actually can make change happen.
Yeah, I definitely think this is an interesting campaign, because also Anima has been running this in Poland for some years now, right? So have you guys seen this almost tension between trying to stop farms and giving animals more space? Have you seen this in your own work, and what are some examples of this playing out?
Yeah, so at least in Poland, I think we have a harder time having, good working relations with producers. So at least there's something going on here that on the one hand, we're just blocking some stuff. And on the other hand, we want to talk to the producers about how to improve animal welfare. So that's part of the reason why we have decided to actually stop this program in Poland now. There's also more deeper reasons into it, but this is definitely one of them, that we're simply just working against ourselves, which is always a bad thing when you have limited resources.
Yeah. And maybe, we can linger on this for a second, because I think this is like a very topical thing. And obviously, maybe because I live in the UK and this is, there's a good amount of activity happening in the UK here. I think some people just say, oh, but if blocking factory farms isn't a good thing, what even is a good thing? Or like, even if we give the animals more space, it's still factory farming, therefore it's bad. So we should stop it. How would you respond to those kind of points or pushback?
I mean, I would at least have to see a strategy where you're not only able to block new farms from being built, but you're able to block all farms, not even in your own country, but also from import. Because it seems to me that we just push the problem around and saying, okay, it's not in my backyard, but now it's in another backyard or in another country. I know in the UK, it's a very big problem that there's simply not enough barns for being able to house broilers. So if we want to have slower growing broilers in the UK, it's so much more difficult now that there are so few broiler barns. So to me, it's a really big problem that this is happening, and it sounds in a sense ridiculous because I shouldn't be saying this as an animal advocate. I should be against these farms being built, but if I want the animals to lead better lives in these places, then I think we need more square meters. Like even if you wanted animals to be, say, free range or something, then you would also need more fields. You wouldn't want to stop them. So it's kind of
Yes.
taking that idea to the full extent.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. If you took this idea even further, it's like we should actually be helping the industry build more barns. If anything, we should be the ones pushing for reduced, easier planning permission. But like, do you think that's something you guys would do, or do you think the logic doesn't extend that far?
I don't know if we would do it actively, but it's definitely something we should consider. It's like we should always be like, how can we make the most change for animals? And if that means helping the bureaucracy of actually getting new farm permissions, then maybe that's what we should do. Or if we should talk to banks and say, well, it's actually good if you give out loans to people who want to expand their farms to build, higher welfare productions, then maybe that's what we should do. So we're not just limited to being the ones always criticizing, but sometimes we're also being constructive in the way that we go around and do business. But we have to be very mindful that we just don't become tools for the industry just to do stuff because we got some ideas. And it might also be that in some cases, stop the farms does make sense. But right now, I just see so many more drawbacks to this idea than benefits.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this approach of almost doing things that maybe feel kind of counterintuitive, but also not totally going along with what industry says. I think maybe that's like maybe a tension, or like something we'll touch on with the fair cop approach we'll discuss. But I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about mainly was the recent major win for broiler chickens in Norway. So maybe you can say a bit more about what was the recent announcement and why was it so monumental for chickens in Norway?
Yeah, I think this is a very groundbreaking victory that we are seeing in Norway. And I think a lot of people can take credit, not only ourselves, but basically what is happening is that the industry will transition fully away from fast growing broiler breeds in Norway. So basically all of Norway would be with slower growing breeds. And I think that's a world first. And it's been a long time getting there. I mean, we started the work in Norway probably in 2017 or so. But even before then, some things have happened with like a major retailer and a major producer having switched already to slower growing. So that kind of paved the way. But but the recent thing is just kind of now we have a line in the sand, and it's going to happen within the next 2 years. Then we will see it, and it's a little bit easier in Norway because Norway is not importing and exporting much, so they have a better environment to do these kind of things than other countries would have.
I guess maybe not everyone is in the weeds of animal welfare science. In your view, how much better is the life of a slow growing chicken, broiler chicken, versus a traditional fast growing one that they use in most places?
The way I would answer is if you want to improve lives for broilers. You cannot get around this topic. Like the most important thing you have to do is not using these breed that has been genetically selected to be so fast growing that it just, it breaks the animals. Like they have, leg health problems. They have, all kinds of, diseases that just come from, bad bone fractures, like all these kind of things that is just so bad for animals. So if we want to go in another direction, it has to be slower growing. Otherwise, you will just see these problems. Then the question is, to what extent does it help with the slower growing breeds that are currently in place? It really depends which one you choose. And unfortunately, what we have seen in recent years is that the breeding companies, they're like trying to find the lower limits for when you can actually have a slower growing breed, and just finding the kind of optimal place where you get the most, productivity and still at a slower growth. So you could take the worst of the slower growing breeds, and you would say that, okay, the differences aren't huge, but they're still very significant.
Yeah.
But if we ever are going to go in this direction, we have to start somewhere, and then we can kind of improve going from there. But I mean, there have been, studies been made, and it shows that, it will be like in like 100 hours of pain, that is like less pain for slower growing breeds compared to fast growing. So it is very significant.
Yeah. And this is 100 hours over their only 6-week lifespan, right? So it's actually a pretty large number of
It's a pretty short time that they live.
Yeah.
So it is very significant. But I mean, you can always question those things and say, oh, is it really 100 hours? Is it maybe just 50 hours, depending on the breed? But I mean, it's quite significant. And if you were a broiler, you would be happy that you were of a different breed than those very fast growing Ross 308 or whatever they're called.
I'll link some welfare footprint research on this, because they've done some of this pain track stuff where they try to measure the different hours of pain from the various sources, like lameness, not being able to move around, or like cardiovascular problems because their heart can't handle how fast they grow, all this crazy stuff.
Exactly.
And yeah, I guess you mentioned one of the reasons why maybe this was easier for Norway to do it is because they don't export and import as much. Is there anything else you think besides that means Norway seems to be doing so well, whereas other places, even Europe, let's say the UK is not doing particularly well? Definitely, I think maybe like Spain, less good. But yeah, why is Norway so progressive on this issue?
I think, at least from our point of view, we've put in a lot of resources into this. So I think that's maybe something that in some countries, I think we're doing better simply because we are prioritizing it very hard. And then we're taking a country-specific approach. So we don't go with this textbook kind of approach and just say, okay, now we just need to push hard for this and that. And we kind of already know before we start what we're going to do. It's like we probably have a thesis, we go out and test it. We talk to companies, we actually take whatever we get back and we feed it into our own thinking and say, okay, so what is needed here? So like at least one of the things that we've done both in Denmark and Norway is to use a word for fast growing breeds and not just say fast growing breeds. We saw that the Netherlands did this already many years back. They used plofkip, which means exploding chicken or something like that. Then in Denmark and Norway, we used the term turbo chicken to link it to the fast turbo growth of these breeds. And these terms have become so popularized that they were actually taken into the official dictionary. So now you can go to the dictionary and you can see turbo chicken. So I think that speaks to something that we didn't just go out there and did, I wouldn't say random stuff, but you know what I mean? Like we actually went in and said, this is a very high priority. I've been personally internal being the one saying we should put more resources into this and more resources so we don't spread ourselves too thin. I think this is a common mistake that can happen in our movement, that we want to cover so many things that we end up not covering so much because we don't have the full resources. And even the resources we put into it now, I would argue, is not sufficient overall. I think we should, prioritize it even higher to optimize for winning.
In terms of priorities, you mean spending a large amount of Anima International's kind of a global budget on just Norway, just broilers, or do you mean something else?
I mean also internally. So in Norway, broilers have been the number one issue we've worked on for say 6 years, and the number two is a distant number two. So it's been maybe 80% of our efforts have been put into broiler work, whereas in maybe in other groups it would be 25% or 20%. And I think that is the main problem here, that you really need to optimize. I think in Denmark right now, we might have 7 people working primarily on broiler chicken welfare, which arguably is quite a lot in a small country. But I would even say we could easily be 20 or 25 people doing this work to be more effective. And then if you take a larger country in Europe, that would be the equivalent of having maybe 40 or 50 people working there. And I don't see any groups having this kind of resources there. And I think it's because we just come from a place of trying to do so many things in the movement. And even, some of us maybe started on a volunteer base, and just being able to do full-time work on this and maybe having 1 or 2 people dedicated to a specific campaign is a lot. But I think we need to evolve from there and saying, well, actually, if we want to change something for, 100 million birds, then maybe we should put even more resources into it rather than just relying on what we could do maybe 10, 15, 20 years back and hoping that we will still do it. Of course, it's still possible, but I just like increasing the chances of winning by actually, really putting in the resources that is needed.
Yeah, and I guess probably some of this is because I assume Norway went, banned cages, stopped using caged eggs a long time ago, whereas in other countries, people are still working on that issue. And do you think your solution to that is almost do things more sequentially, that groups shouldn't even move on to broiler work until they've almost entirely wiped out cages, i.e. 80%, 90% plus of the industry is cage free? How would you approach that for countries that are less developed?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit conservative in this way, that I would rather optimize for, winning one thing at a time. But I think that's also just because we are where we are, where most groups just have, say a handful of people employed in a country, or maybe 10 or 20. So it's still relatively few. So it's probably just about having a realistic view of what can 10, 15, 20 people do. Can they actually realistically work on 5 issues and be hugely successful on all of them? I mean, I'm not saying that we can only work on one issue, obviously, but maybe we should have one main priority, and then the others being more what you call it, experimenting maybe, or being more okay, let's see what we can achieve here.
Yeah.
So definitely, I would be more conservative leaning in this way. But I mean, sometimes it can also be a blocker that you're okay, we haven't won this yet, so now we can't start anything. So that could also just set us back 10, 15 years because we don't take any chances at all.
I generally do think focus is good. And I probably agree, on the margin, more groups should try, go, like I said, all in on something and try finish it, spend maybe 60% plus their resources on one program. But I guess the 2 drawbacks I see is, one is that maybe you don't know when to quit, and actually you're not going to win this thing, but you're too stubborn and you don't like losing, so you don't quit. And maybe the other one is, I think focus maybe has a related downside where almost I think campaigners can get a bit burned out from, I've been working on broilers for 10 years and I haven't seen much progress, and I'm so disillusioned. What are your thoughts on these 2 challenges? And do you have these internally?
I very much agree on the human side of it. I mean, I've done broiler work now for nearing 10 years, and I can feel the drain it has, and I've seen the drain on other people as well. On the other hand, if things are not really working in your favor, then switching to another campaign might not be the real solution. I think especially if we talk about it from cage-free to broiler, I would argue broiler work, at least with what we're trying to achieve with it, is maybe 5 times as hard as cage-free work. So if you have a problem finishing up cage-free work, then moving on to broilers will be to me a disaster, really, because if you're not able to win the cage-free thing, I would argue very hardly that it's totally unrealistic that you would win the broiler campaign. So I think in that case, if it's okay, people are beginning to burn out or lose motivation, then at least you should pick something that is more winnable and then build from there. And I think that's also something to be very aware of, that it's very important that we pick winnable campaigns and targets so we can build on that, because even a long win can make, quicker wins later on. If you develop a branding of, this is the organization that always win, then maybe we can actually cut some years later on when we try to do other stuff, rather than, this is the organization that just switches to a different topic. So we just have to duck and cover and hope that they get fed up and do something else. So don't give in or don't play along.
Yeah, that's just fun. Yeah, I think it's interesting to have your kind of like subjective thing of maybe the broiler work is 5 times as hard based on, I guess, you looking at how much more resistant the companies are, maybe how much more of a change it requires and how longer it's taking. So yeah, I think that's interesting. And I guess on this knowing when to quit thing, I guess like how does Anima think about this? I guess probably most of the times I've seen Anima stop doing work, it's been because you actually don't think it's the best thing for animals, but maybe more on the grounds of, I think an example is like the live carp stuff in Poland. You actually thought maybe it was having an inverted negative effects on fish. So it's not for like winnable reasons. But I guess, have you had this thing internally where you've stopped a campaign because actually you thought this is not the best use of our time anymore? We think it's very hard to win and we should do something else?
So I would say in Poland, we at least decided to scale back on the broiler campaign because we saw that a lot of work was still needed for the cage-free and we weren't making a lot of progress. So
Yeah.
probably for too long, we were doing broiler work in Poland that wasn't really worth it. And we weren't realistic enough about how challenging it was to win this campaign in Poland.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a good example of it. And probably just something that begs the question, like with all the work that we do, like don't take decisions lightly in a sense, because once you decide to do something, once you decide to open a program, you're committing a lot of resources because it's much harder to stop something in a sense. Like also some people, they get very like personally invested in something, and myself included. If I've been working on a campaign for 2 or 3 years, I want to see it through. I mean, unless I can see that, okay, it was totally flawed and we shouldn't have done it. But if it's not clear to me, then someone else has to, convince me that, okay, I mean, it's not working. So that's really something to be aware of.
Totally. Yeah. I think there's all kinds of things like whether it's sunk cost fallacy or just, it's literally your job as the broiler campaigns manager. And if the campaign goes, you go. So of course you'd feel rightfully kind of like concerned about this change.
On a more micro level, in a sense, I think we see the same problem with specific targeted campaigns against a certain company for like the same topic. That could be broilers, that could be cage free. That I think historically we've seen groups changing targets too often. So it's like after 6 months, 12 months, like people get a bit burned out, or they're like, oh, maybe it was the wrong target, let's switch. And I think that companies are paying attention to this, and they see the script and they're like, okay, like historically, if we just hold on for like 4 more weeks or 4 more months, they will get fed up and they will go do something else. And I think that's really bad for us, because then when we actually decide to go all in, then the companies will not believe that we're going all in, and they will just hold on for too long. So I think it's important that we build up like credibility part, that when we actually decide to do something, we are in it for the long haul and not just for some months.
Yes, I totally agree. I want to come back to that. So hold that thought. I think that's a very important point that I want to discuss. Maybe we'll do like one final thing on Norway, then we can maybe transition to this.
Sure.
The general like approach to campaigning. And the thing is, you kind of mentioned the commitments. They're relatively short term. I think they said 2027. I assume that means the end of 2027. Maybe can you say more about how difficult that was to accomplish, or like is the general thesis of Anima is almost trying to get companies to prioritize implementation rather than commitments, even if maybe there's no public commitment to show for some time?
Yeah, I think the part about commitments versus implementation is very important in the movement. I think for many years, a lot of groups have relied on commitments being almost as if it was a legally binding contract and you would get some compensation or something if the company didn't follow through. And I saw that very early on with the broiler campaign, being like, oh, working with broilers back in 2018 or 17, and then asking companies to sign up for a commitment for 2026, not knowing, like maybe the companies didn't even know what the cost would be of this, and maybe the people who signed up would not be along in the company 5, 6, 7 years later. So quite quickly we decided that we want to see implementation happen, as soon as possible, like preferably in a matter of months or at least within a year or two, so we can actually see the companies they follow through. So this is also what we've been doing in Norway, and this is also what brings more credibility from the producer's point of view when they actually see that companies are doing stuff and not just saying stuff. I mean, we've been warned, for instance, in the UK with KFC, they had made a commitment for the Better Chicken commitment, or the ECC. It's the same thing. And we were warned by some suppliers saying, well, we, like many years back, like we simply don't believe they're going to do it. And they were right about that. And it turns out just many years later that, I mean, they probably didn't even do it in good faith. They just did it. And that's a problem. So we want to see if companies do it in good faith. Otherwise, we're just giving them a pass for many years, and then we're losing the momentum. So sometimes we believe that we get momentum by getting a commitment, but sometimes it can actually have the exact opposite effect. And so this is part of the reason I think we've had success in Norway, is because we can get companies to do stuff on the short term. So the industry believes that it's doable. So they eventually will be motivated to actually do stuff because they can see that there is a market for it.
Yeah, because that's definitely one of the concerns. Like one of the reasons why KFC and others in the UK have claimed they can't do this is, there's no slow-growing breed kind of production or supply. Like we couldn't do this even if we wanted to. And of course, I think the reasonable retort is, well, you could have started this, 8 years ago. And does that mean something? You said you were doing this in Norway right from the beginning. So like, what did it actually look like tangibly? Were you asking companies to say, hey, I want you to do 10% slow-growing breeds by 6 months or 1 year, rather than saying do 100% in 8 years?
To me, a negotiation is you come up with your, like, what is your ideal thing? It's like, yep, go 100% ECC as fast as you can. And then you see how the company responds, and you see what is actually realistic in the context, seeing what are other companies doing, or what is actually realistic. And then you go from there, rather than saying, oh, what is the least we can accept? Or would that be own brand products in 6 years' time? I mean, if we go in starting like this, to me, it's not even a serious negotiation. Quite often, we try to get them not to go 10%, but to go as close to 100% as possible. Also, because most companies, if they are doing something, they actually want to, like, if they are going to tell the world, they are not going to tell the world, we will do something in 5 or 6 years' time. That's not going to be very marketable for them. So if it's also interesting for them, it's cooler to say, yeah, we'll do it in 6 months, or we'll do it in 1 year. So that's what we're aiming for. But in some instances, we have had to, meet them halfway. So in Denmark, some of the retailers, they have just gone, say, 30-40% on slower growing breeds by now, and they started from maybe 5% or 10% some years back, and that's what we've been able to achieve. That was not what we set out to do, but after having had 5, 6, 7 meetings, and you can see, okay, this is where we can land for now. Then sometimes you just have to accept something and just tell them up front that, I mean, this is not ideal, but this is just good enough for us to, accept it in a sense, and actually maybe also celebrate it publicly, which is also an important part of what we do here.
Yeah. Except as in, like, not campaign against it, and we'll kind of leave you be for the time being, kind of thing. Well, not leave you be, but
yes,
not do a big public campaign.
Yeah, that as well.
I think that's a very good segue into, I guess, what the main reason why I want to speak with you today, which is about this, I guess, like, I don't know what you call it, new approach to campaigning, or definitely like new terminology, where traditionally people in the movement have spoken lots about good cop and bad cop, and this is a very familiar set of roles, whereas you and others at Anima are coining something new. You're calling it fair cop, although I know you don't like the name. We can talk about this, but maybe do you want to say more about what it means to be a fair cop and why you thought this new kind of like approach was useful?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing is, I think for so many years that I've been part of this movement, I've been doing this work for more than 15 years now. And I think a lot of people, they're talking about this, oh, I'm more like a good cop, or I'm more like a bad cop. And it becomes a little bit like a theater or some role play. But I think that's also a bit dangerous, because you might fall into these certain roles that if you are a bad cop, then part of what you do is you meet with companies and you put up demands, and you're being very firm, and you're not, backing down. And I think it can become very scripted, the way you go about and do things. Like, some of the bad cop thinking is like, oh, you're not here to solve the company's problems. Like, their problems are their problems. You're just here to state what needs to be done. And I always had a funny feeling around this. Like, even when I started doing this kind of corporate work, that was many years back, and that was with the fur issue, and getting fashion companies to go fur-free. And in the beginning, I had no clue how to do this work. And I was like, why am I sitting here? And how can I put up any demands? And what do I say next when they say this? Like, I was so confused. So to me, it was like, a bit of hard learning, like what can we actually do? And it took me a lot of years to actually get really much into it and in a sense be more curious when working with companies. So like on the one hand, I'm probably the most critical person you can find about society and company. I generally have very low trust in institutions and society, but at the same time, I have, you could say, a higher trust in people in general. So I mean, people representing companies are still people. They also have a role they are filling out, and just trying to really understand what are they motivated by, what are they doing, and if they are stating something like, oh, we're getting our products from this supplier and they say this is great, then rather than just saying, no, but you need to abide by these standards, then we would actually spend time saying, okay, that's interesting. We'll get in touch with that supplier. We'll have a dialogue with them. We're trying to see if we can solve the problems. And then, sometimes this leads to a dead end and it's like, it was in a sense a waste of time. But in almost every case, you get more information and then you're better skilled in the next conversation because now you're talking about real things rather than just having, the same presentation you could show to any company and they're just being treated like a number rather than real people with like, real objections. And the way we talk to the companies is not about objection handling. It's not like, oh, if they say this, then you say that. And it's like, oh, we'll just go into it. And quite often we know some stuff because now we have multiple information. We have it both from this company, we have it from another company, we have it from a producer, we have it from other industry people. And then we combine all this. And then I don't know how much that relates to Fair Cup per se, but it relates to like a more curious approach where we're not just here to be angry, or the other way being like the good cup, just being like, oh, let's just understand and everything. Let's have some coffee and let's meet again in a year's time. We're kind of the in-between. We have some leverage. We can say, well, we are able to do campaigns, but we also like if companies do good stuff, well, we will also celebrate them publicly. So we're building some relationships. So it's a lot about building relationships, which is also makes it the terminology cup maybe a little bit weird, which you also alluded to that. Or what is the right term here? I'm not sure, but it had to break with the good cup, bad cup terminology because I think that confuses a lot of people because they feel like they have to be either this or the other thing, and they don't know if there is like a kind of a middle ground that actually has more benefits from both sides of it.
For people who aren't listening on video, I would encourage you to check out the video, or we'll link to an article where there's diagrams. But I think there's some nice diagrams you've made, which is the spectrum goes from collaborative to confrontational, where the good cops, clustered around collaborative in terms of their tactics, and the bad cops tactics are centered around confrontational. And your views, Fair Cops kind of straddles both of these. Maybe doesn't go as extreme into the collaborative or as extreme into the confrontational, but they have a wider range than both of them. And and you kind of saying this kind of helps you rather than almost like playing into a persona. You just have to be more flexible based on the needs of that particular company and that particular country. Even is that roughly how you think about it?
Yeah, and also just having a more human side to do this work. So it doesn't like you're not here to just go and tell someone what to do. I mean, nobody likes to be told what to do, and you can just imagine if you were at a dinner party and you came across as you kind of the typical bad cop just for that, like people would be like, who are you to speak like this? So, I mean, if you start off being a good cop in a sense, if we are to use that terminology, just be as fair and as nice and as friendly as you can until proven otherwise, even if you have this kind of idea that, oh, maybe this company will just fool you in a sense. It's like, but let them understand that you understand that they're fooling you by actually taking the time. So and it's kind of like my colleague Connor and I from the UK, like we spend a lot of time talking about this because sometimes he can be like, oh, but then I know the company will say this, so why shouldn't I just already in the email write this? And I'm like, no, let it play out. Like don't assume it. Probably there's a 90% chance you're right, but if we already start, assuming what they will say next, it makes for a weird relationship because we just already know their script. Just like, play in good faith and then let them kind of set their own traps in a sense, saying like, oh yeah, we care a lot about animals. And then later on they show that they don't. And then you can say, well, actually you said this. and now you're not doing this, so this puts us in a difficult spot. Then over time, it becomes more and more, you could say, justified that you become more confrontational because you all tried being collaborative, but they failed in a sense, and you did your best, and you can show that you did it maybe over a period of months or even years. And now the company, in a sense, owes you something because maybe they promised some stuff that they're not upholding, rather than you just coming right off the bat being, pushy and demanding. And then it's so much easier for them to dismiss you and say, well, we don't want to talk to you. We talk to the good cop. We've tried that with many companies being like, no, we like to talk to that other organization because they're not putting up demands. They don't say it like that, but we understand why they say it, right?
Yeah, and maybe we'll focus on like the bad cop side of things for a while and how this is different. Because I feel like more groups play into that, or I find that personally more interesting. So we can talk about this. Yeah, you were kind of saying almost one of the reasons to engage with them in good faith, and also I think Jan said this in the talk that I'll also link, is you almost want to engage with them, kind of in like a respectful way, as if they are going to do something, even when you think they're not. Almost so if they do, stop engaging or pull back on their promises, and you start a campaign, their response is something like, fair enough, like we deserved it. They treated us almost as good as you can treat it. Therefore, we kind of deserve this. Is that kind of your thinking around like what their response should be at the point you start the campaign?
Yeah, that's part of it, because I think probably for many years, I imagine a lot of organizations have not thought enough about the importance of diplomacy and the long-term game, and being very focused on what needs to happen now. So I think some groups may think, oh, we're just here to put pressure at all costs.
Yes.
And not thinking about, okay, what if we have to meet them in 6 months' time, or in 1 year's time, or in 3 or 4 years' time? I mean, we have a few examples with companies that don't want to meet with us just because we started a campaign that we even thought was fair, but the company didn't. If we had like more of a pattern of switching targets all the time, we might find ourselves in a situation where there's so many companies we couldn't talk to. We see it, unfortunately, quite a bit in Poland where we work, because for quite many years we have not paid enough attention to these dynamics. So the tone has been a bit more harsh, a bit more rough. And a lot of companies are like, we don't really want to deal with you, or they're being like, we don't really trust you. And trust is a little bit like muscle. It's very slow to gain and very, very fast to lose. So also keeping that in mind. So it's not only about what they think right now. It's also about what can you do later on. And now we talk about broilers. What are we talking about in 5 or 10 years? Like these companies, they need to maybe not trust. I think trust is also important, but also just kind of have a sense that it's kind of reasonable what we're doing. It has to be difficult for them to criticize us in the sense of being, oh, you're just outrageous, because we don't need to be outrageous. I think it's just something we sometimes become, but we don't have to be outrageous in order to make a difference.
Yeah. I think, there's a really important point in that. Yeah, for example, if you're engaging with the retailer in your country, odds are you will need to keep talking to them for as long as you want to keep helping animals, because they are probably one of the most important players. So yes, you almost shouldn't burn your credibility, saying, if you don't do this in 2 weeks, we're going to do the most, crazy campaign of all time. And then lo and behold, you don't actually do this campaign.
Exactly.
Or it doesn't matter that much, because yes, like in 6 months, like every time you say this, they'll be like, these guys are nuts. Let's just ignore them. They're not serious
people. It becomes the fable of the boy who cried wolf. So it's like, then when the wolf is coming, nobody will believe you. So if you do all this bluffing all the time, I mean, it's not really part of the good negotiation game in my book. I mean, if this was the only encounter you had, and like it's the hostage situation is pulling a gun to your kid, okay, maybe that's the time where you say, yeah, I'll have $1 million, I'll give it to you straight away, just to save your kid. But I mean, this is ongoing for many years. You can't just do that all the time. It's not going to work. It might work. You can fool some people some of the time, but not all of the time. All these kind of ideas, right?
Yeah, so it reminds me of, I was talking to Jan, also from Anima International, who said there's this game that he and others love playing, Twilight Imperium, where it's so focused on your reputation that you might actually lose one game because people think about playing with the same group of people over years, because the community is quite small, such that, even if you could almost cheat someone or lie to win in one game, you shouldn't do that, because overall that's going to harm you over the next 5 or 10 games. And it seems like it's a similar analog for how you should engage with retailers or food companies as a advocacy group. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing to be aware of. Like when it's a little bit related to the bluffing part. Like if you do bluff, I think if you play a game like poker, it's part of the game, so people expect people to bluff, and it's not considered wrong because it's part of the rules. You're allowed to do that. But if you do that in social settings, you're basically just lying, and it will be found out. That's going to reflect very badly. And I mean, I had an experience the other way recently with a company, and they kept saying that, oh, they can't like go the full switch to slower growing birds because basically there are not enough eggs on the market in the breeding part, and they talked about it as if it was like an impossibility. And I just happened to know enough people in the industry so I could like fact check this. So my intuition was this does not sound right. I mean, it's true that it will take longer than we would like, but it could be fixed within a year's time. And I had to speak to numerous people like in the industry just to have it confirmed, and then I could kind of feed it back to them. But what happened now is my trust in them has lowered significantly, and I know when they say stuff, I cannot trust it by default because now I know at least one time where I couldn't trust them. And this is kind of the thing where they could have said all kind of other things. They could have been more honest. They could just have said, we are less motivated to do so, and we understand that this must be annoying to you. And then I would have, respected them more. And I think this is the analogy, like with the Twilight Imperium or whatever game, and probably a lot of listeners are not unfamiliar with it, but it's like if you have this game you play repeated times and you like, it could also be Risk, like Conquer the World and stuff, and you're like, oh, let's make a deal, and then haha, I just stabbed you in the back, and it's like, okay, I'm not gonna make deals with you again. And it's just so painful. Like reputation is one of the most, and credibility is one of the most important assets that we have, and if we gamble with that, we're gambling with our future success. So I think that's also what you're suggesting with the question here.
I think that there's something you mentioned, in the article, which is also around the lines of, you kind of put it in a poker analogy where, if you, for example, you're going to say, you're going to go all in and we're going to do this huge campaign, but actually, even if you go all in, you maybe have 100 chips and your opponent has 1,000,000 chips. And, if like realistically, you can't actually inflict that much damage on them. And maybe this is somewhat of a bitter pill for us to swallow, that actually, yes, my 10-person campaigning group, my 20-person campaigning group can't force this multi-billion-dollar company to do it as one. Like that's shouldn't be surprising, but maybe sometimes it's like hard thing to swallow. And that seems like that's another like rationale that's driving this thinking.
Yes, that's a lot of it. It's I think a lot of people in the movement over the years have had probably too high thoughts of ourselves, and sometimes it can also come after, say, a gold rush, such as cage-free commitments. If you suddenly get 200 or 500 cage-free commitments in a few years, then the sky's the limit. Then you think, oh, we're so powerful, we're gonna hit them like a steel train. Like all this kind of metaphors, I think they have been flourished around in the movement, and then it takes a long time to kind of swallow that pride and be like, okay, actually we're the ones being fooled right now. Like a lot of companies are signing up to commitments, they're not following through. What does that say about the whole situation? Like we even see companies band together, like in the UK, and like some big restaurant groups, KFC, Nando's, others, they're like forming a sustainable chicken forum. Like very hard to believe that it has anything to do with good intentions. It's more like backtracking. So they can do this, they can fool us because right now we're not strong enough. If we were stronger, they wouldn't do it. And admitting to ourselves that we're not that strong is actually powerful to me, because that means that when you're at the table negotiating with these companies, you're not making these mistakes that you would do if you had the smallest army in the world and you knew it. Then it's like, okay, we have a small army, but it's like it's still a good army that we have, and we know how to use it and when to use it. So we don't just left and right just talk about, okay, we're gonna launch this big thing. Like when we launch a big thing, maybe we need to plan for it for 6 months or a year, and maybe we need to tell the company upfront that we're going to do it, also in the hopes that maybe they will change their mind along the way so we can save these resources. But if we do it, then we just have to really, really do it and prove that we are able to do it when we really want to, but we can't do it every day. That's simply not possible with the size we have right now.
Can you almost like give an example of a case where maybe Anima has moved to escalation or a campaign, and almost how long it took or how much you're willing to put into it as an example of, because it seems like one of the takeaways I'm having is you should do less small campaigns that you're not going to stick with, and when you go in, you go really hard, and then you kind of stick with it, and you're in for like maybe several years, like very big project. And like maybe do you have an example of this if that's indeed the
Yeah, I
case?
mean, in Denmark, we've almost only had one retailer campaign. We've had two, I would say, but most of it has been targeting one single retailer, and that has been going on for probably 4 years' time or so. To be honest, I don't think we have managed to put as much pressure as I would have liked, because it has been, on and off, as it is often with these kind of campaigns. It's hard to keep up momentum for 4 years straight every day of the week. But I mean, there has been a lot of pushes, and it has, it has done quite a lot. And I mean, that company has also done a lot of implementation now to go to slower growing. But also something I think some people might miss here is when you do a campaign targeting one company, you're also showing this to all the other companies. And I think it's very important not to make too many enemies, because the more enemies you make, then suddenly we are the ones being surrounded, and they can, in a sense, campaign against us by withdrawing their commitments or going out with negative stories about us. So I think it's important that we know how few enemies we should make, and even when we make enemies, try to not make them enemies. Just try to be straightforward with them, saying, okay, now we've tried for a year, 2 years through collaboration and dialogue to reach something. We're not able to. Now we will move on to the next stage, which will be this. But we can still talk at the same time. And I think with some companies, we've managed to have a very good dialogue while also having pretty good campaign. And I think that's valuable whenever you can have that, because at some point you want to get back to the table and make a deal. And if you've kind of pissed off everyone, then I mean, it's really hard. Like, I think sometimes you can see companies not wanting to make a deal just because they don't want to lose face, and that's a real problem when our tactics become so harsh that maybe because of the tactics, then the company would rather just stick to it and be proud of not giving in and these kind of things.
There's the case that you wrote about, which is, I think it was a company that was going to drop its catering commitments, and maybe like the instinctive response could have been, we're going to do a campaign. But from my understanding, you kind of engage with them in like a more of a, assuming the best of intentions kind of way, that like, okay, we'll try to work with you to do this. And this took, months and months, and you kind of probably waited longer than other groups would have to launch a campaign. Maybe do you want to say more about this example as well?
Yeah. So we had a company that was kind of suddenly changing the scope of the catering commitment. So suddenly it wasn't everything as they used to say. And their communication with us was really, really weird, and what you call like avoidant in a sense, and confusing, and also sometimes just arrogant, but maybe not on purpose. It was very hard. It was kind of deciphering some ancient tombstones or something. It was very, very hard. and I remember my colleague was like, this is just so annoying. I think we should just go into campaign mode. I was like, nope. Whenever there is still some opportunity for avoiding because once you start the campaign, that could just mean that the company becomes even more, hostile or non-collaborative. So I think what tipped the scales here was like the patience, but also the fact that we had actually celebrated them earlier, and we could point towards that. So we actually had some leverage in a sense. So if we were only like a good cop, like, then we couldn't even put up any demands. But also if we were only a bad cop kind of organization, we probably wouldn't have praised them, because I mean, it's not our job to praise them for something that is not great. Like, they have to praise themselves. So having that kind of combination of having provided positive value and also being able to read between the lines and being patient and giving some benefit of the doubt, I think that just came to this conclusion that they actually went back to what they said initially, and then we actually went out and celebrated them publicly, and then we're very happy. And I think people, they kind of underestimate sometimes how important it is to spend some time. Like, if you were ready to spend 1,000 hours campaigning or 5,000 hours campaigning, why wouldn't you spend 100 hours doing something positive when they actually do what you want them to do? Because by doing that, you're signaling to the rest of society and to the rest of organizations, that companies, that this is a good thing to do, and this is something they would maybe also want to have this praise. But also the company that is being praised, they feel like they're being held more accountable in a sense, because now they are maybe praising themselves, or they're giving a quote and they're like, okay, we actually celebrated ourselves. Now we really have to deliver, rather than this being their number 25 priority. Then maybe it becomes a number 5 priority. And that's really important, especially if 5 years later they're changing their mind a little bit again. Then you have this kind of history to go back to and say, hey, do you remember what happened? And then like, oh yeah, we actually owe you something, or we owe ourselves something, or the animals, or like in whatever way you want to put it.
I don't know, maybe I'm very cynical, but I guess like I've maybe thought less about the praise side of things. And I guess why wouldn't they just say, oh yeah, you praised us, but oh well, like we're not doing this like thanks, that was nice of you, but like almost like we don't care what you did 5 years ago, this is irrelevant to us. Like, does that happen? Or yeah.
I mean, that can of course also happen, but to give an example, like in Denmark, we work with some big companies that have, made commitments for broiler welfare, and we have managed to get them like millions of impressions, like in mainstream media, just like in all the big media outlets. They have been praised for being, oh, this company is phasing out turbo chicken. So then it becomes much more committing to them, because now it's about their credibility. It's not about just what does the supporters of Anima think. It's more like, what does the consumers think? What does the competitors think? What does journalists think? It's like, oh, this is a company that makes empty promises. I think that's pretty bad for a company, because their credibility will be hurt by this. So we've tried situations with this, like this, where the company has then, backtracked a little bit, and then when we were back at the table talking about it, you could sense the difference, that they knew this had happened, like they had gotten this public praise, so they felt compelled to do something. Whereas if it had just been on their website, they could have just deleted, oh, we have other priorities now, we're sorry, like that. It was a good talk we had back then, but things have changed. That would be much more easy for them to write it off.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it's probably something more in the media, where if you're the organization that praised, and like you're kind of like a unbiased third party who's giving praise, and then they change, you have a good story to say, look, they lied to us, we thought they were doing this, and that's like another interesting tidbit.
Yeah, where you have a much better like leverage point now, because you were the one like forming the positive narrative. Now you also have the power to form the negative story, and companies know that. So it basically just gives you more power, but it also puts the agenda of animal suffering or factory farming, like it puts it out there. So it's also just an opportunity for, you could say, awareness building and getting people interested in the case, rather than everything happening under the radar and people not really understanding what's going on. I think it's important that we have significant support from the public with whatever we do, because otherwise it's hard to get to the next milestone.
We've spoken a bunch about bad cop stuff. Before we move on, or like how it's different, bad cop, traditional bad cop. Is there anything else I've missed on like how this is different to traditional bad cop campaigning, or maybe why you think it can work better?
No, I think we've covered it quite well. So I mean, what I can say is, I think some people, they have a tendency, and I think even in some organization, you have kind of a quite clear division between corporate outreach work, talking to companies, and campaigning, as if it's totally different entities. And to me, that's a flawed way of thinking about it, because one thing will affect the other. So if you have like a totally outrageous campaigning team that doesn't care about, saying attacking the CEO's credibility, not even understanding how this could, change the dynamics in the negotiation room, I think that's bad. I mean, sometimes you should, criticize the CEO, but when you do it, you should know like the risks and the benefit, and have this kind of assessments going on. So at all times you need to consider, like, how will this impact the relationship with the company? What's the upside? What's the downside? And I think some groups don't consider that so much. It's more like, okay, now it's just about making some ravage, just making a story, whatever it takes, as long as it's legal, whatever. and I think it's more than that. So I think having these things work more closely together, I think that optimizes for bringing more results in the long term.
Yeah, interesting. And so how does it work with Anima then? So you don't have separate teams, you just have someone who's just called corporate engagement or campaigner? Yeah, how do you guys do it?
Yeah, so often we have a team working with the issue. So that would be the broiler issue, but like people can do both parts of the work. They can do both the campaigning side of the work and the negotiation. I mean, Not always, but at least these people will work together and they will talk together, not like, okay, I've just handed it over to that other department. It's out of my hands now. We would never treat it like that. That would be a big mistake in our opinion.
Yeah, so ideally it's almost the same people that are doing both functions, and then if not, make sure that they're working very closely as a team rather than...
At least they're able to. I mean, sometimes it's also nice to be like, I'm mainly working with the corporate side and now I'm mainly just handing it over to the other people, but it's not that I have no say in this. So it's like, okay, I can talk to the people during the campaign. I'm not currently involved in it, but I agree with what is happening rather than, I can't help it and they're just doing their stuff. And I think at least that can be also become a bit theatrical in a sense. It's like, it's the guy with the other hat. Like it also becomes a little bit unbelievable from the company side. It's like, okay, what the fuck happened?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, then I think that's been very interesting on maybe the differences to like traditional bad cop campaigning, which I think probably spent more time on it because I think that is the majority of the movement that I see, or at least that I engage with. But maybe more on the good cop side. How is this traditional to good cop campaigning? It's just being more willing to actually escalate and do campaigns, whereas most good cops don't traditionally do that.
Yeah, I think at least the impression most people have from the good cop. Also, I would say a lot of people already do kind of a combination of good cop and bad cop. So it can sound a little bit like, either you're one thing or the other. And maybe that illustration we talked about before also shows that the bad cop sphere or like quite wide, and it can also be quite collaborative, but not so collaborative. But at least with the good cop, it looks like that's much more narrow usually. So those organizations that identifies more like good cops, they will hardly do any campaigning, or the campaigning they will do will be more like bringing some awareness to the issue, but not really telling the companies like too hardly what they want and why they think it's a reasonable, you could say, demand. So I probably said before, like we shouldn't put up too many demands, but at the same time we should still be able to. So it's a little bit like, understanding how to go in there and be very, self-confident about what we are asking for is reasonable, but it's not reasonable to just go in and expect it to happen straight away. It's like, it's also reasonable to see things from like the counterpart's point of view and understand that if you had a business, you wouldn't just invest $10 million in something not knowing if it would be successful, and us just dismissing that fact would be unprofessional, I would say. It would just be like very narrow-minded.
Yeah.
But then the good cop, they often fail in the sense that because they have no leverage, they just rely on the companies wanting to do this out of goodwill, or alternatively that there are other campaigning groups that are able to exert enough pressure, so then the good cop work becomes easier because it's like, they know that there are other people doing the heavy lifting part, and then they can just do the talking part, which, I mean, in a perfect world, that could also work. But to me, it's still weird that you wouldn't like give yourself permission to be more firm at a meeting and be like, okay, come on, we've talked about this 3 years now. You're not moving. I mean, in our view, this is not acceptable, or this is weird, or this is not in line with expectations of society, and this is something we should make aware that your company is not doing anything. You're saying stuff, but you're not doing stuff. That's a problem, and I think we should allow ourselves. I think it's a weird situation if you're not giving yourself that option out of some, I don't know what the principles would be, but just like because we don't feel comfortable doing that. I think that would often be the reason. It's just we don't feel comfortable doing this, and we need to be able to feel comfortable about at some point putting up some demands, or at least drawing a line in the sand and say, okay, now we will escalate things from here because nothing is happening.
Yeah, I guess the story you can tell yourself, and obviously I've never worked in spaces, but if we're too critical, they'll stop working with us, and that means that their progress will be even slower than it is now. Therefore, we need to keep them on side. And I guess in terms of leverage, the praise they give, right? If they do something good, this group can praise them. And I guess maybe, you see less often where the good cops also criticize when things backtrack. Maybe this does happen, I don't see it, but I guess maybe that would be, one of the conclusions if they were to shift more into the flexible.
Yeah, I mean, it happens a little bit. I think the good cops also has a bit of bad cop in them, and the bad cops also has a bit of good cop in them. But it's kind of, having just a wider, it's just being able to play on more strings, so to speak. I think that's just healthy. And I think it also goes back to this role playing. Then it's like if
Yes.
you identify as a good cop, then I would not like I can't tell you what to do, and it becomes very limiting in the way. And also, I think companies will respect you less because they know that you're kind of maybe not a pushover, but it's like you're never going to cross that line. But if you're just being, I would say, more yourself, just being more authentic and saying, well, we're here to improve the lives of animals. We believe it's possible to do it in a collaborative way, but we also believe it's possible to do it in a more like arm wrestling way. And we are in a bit, in a sense, we don't care which way it's going to go. We're just going to go with the way where we see most change will happen, but we will do it in a fair and reasonable way. And this is where the maybe fair word comes in. It's like, we don't want to escalate things too hastily because we wouldn't accept it the other way around. If someone just called you and say, I'm going to sue you for this, and that, you would be like, okay, I'll hang up and I'll call my own lawyer and say, well, I don't want to deal. And the lawyer would say, okay, don't talk to a person who threatens you like this. And it's kind of having that understanding of when are you able to turn up the heat. And what I often say is like, you can always turn up the heat more, but it's very hard to go the other way. You can't just, start, say, for the sake of that, you can't start yelling and then talk, calmly again. Afterwards, people will be like, hey, that was a change in character, that was unpleasant. Now I trust you less. So it's like, be slow to escalate. That would be my general piece of advice, because there are so many companies who want to influence, and we have so limited resources. So why should we burn the bridges too early? Why not just wait and see, is it really needed here, or is there a way forward without having to do it? Kind of the law of least resistance in a sense.
Yeah, and actually, I think you alluded to this in the article, which is, in a way, campaigning is very time intensive, and even if you end up negotiating for longer to then win something, that's often still a better use of your time in terms of a quicker route to impact compared to campaigning. Then you have to do some 2-year campaign, which is like very labor intensive. So it's almost like it actually can be more efficient just to negotiate for a bit longer.
Yeah. I think sometimes groups should even scale up on corporate outreach work and scale down on campaigning work, because often when you campaign, you can just campaign one target, but when you do negotiations, you can work with 20 companies for the same amount of resources invested. So there's definitely a lot that can be saved by being good at this and having the necessary resources for doing it. But it's also a harder skill in a sense. It takes longer to learn to be good. Just as I explained in the beginning, I was pretty clueless how to do it, and it has taken me years to reach a level where I feel much more confident, and I think I could still improve a lot from here. I think it's easier to learn the ropes of doing campaigning because it's more turn-based in a sense. You can just wait and see. Whereas if you are in the room, you cannot just sit silent and be like, okay, I'm just going to call a friend or ask the audience or something. So there's like the skill cap here it's different for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe a few more questions on this before I go on to another topic. Another one is, I guess, like, what about almost bad faith actors or people who have already put up the walls and they just won't engage with you at all? At that stage, do you think it's fine just to do whatever is required to get them to do whatever's needed for animals?
It's quite rare. I experience, like at least in Denmark and Norway, that companies don't want to engage. It happens every now and then, maybe because we have run a campaign or because they're just being very avoidant and just, but most of the time we're actually able to engage with them. But that also comes down to, I think, our branding or credibility, because we've spent years actually building up that kind of aura around us.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, if a company is careless about it, and we might just say, okay, I mean, we sense that you're not able, you're not willing, you're not interested in talking. So probably our next step would be a public campaign around this. But it might not be that this is the company where you think a public campaign is the most effective. It might be with a different company. So it's also like, even in that instance, how often is it that you decide that now you need to escalate because you actually lack some information? Because that's also the power of having multiple meetings with companies. You get a lot of insights, a lot of information, and that is something that can sometimes be undervalued. Also from like the good cop perspective, that's what they are very good at. It's getting much more information, so they actually know where it hurts or where it's difficult. Sometimes it may be a supply line situation that nobody thought about. And then it's like, oh, if only we can solve this part, then maybe there is a way forward, rather than just exerting pressure through public outrage and these kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, anyway, it's kind of good to know that it happens. It's relatively infrequent that someone will not engage with you at all. So I guess maybe, and maybe if that's the case, then
I think the more you've built up a kind of aura of being like, oh, these people, they are reasonable and fair, and also they provide some value. So if you are actually able to form media stories about, this company has done this company has done that, and producers are seeing like there's more demand for this kind of thing. I mean, it's quite often that I write, a CEO or something, and they respond very quickly, like maybe within a day, because like we have seen changes happen in Denmark, for instance, where it worked quite a lot. But then in other countries where not a lot of things are happening, it might take, weeks or even months to get hold of a person, because it's like it's so low on the agenda, because not much is happening on this issue, and we don't really know these people, and we don't even know if we can trust them, and all these kind of things. So it just goes to show like how much can be built up over time if people know you, and they know you to be reasonable enough given like the role that you're representing. So this is something I think people can sometimes undervalue, because maybe they haven't experienced it themselves in to that extent.
Yeah, but it's said. I mean, like I was thinking, if you're like a traditional bad cop group right now, that's like basically only done negative campaigning, and you're kind of quick to escalate, etc., etc. But then if you try to shift into this more fair cop, flexible cop role, then maybe it's quite hard, because you have this reputation which is unhelpful, and maybe take some time to shed that, and maybe for that initial period, people will actually be ignoring you. So I guess, do you have any tips on that?
It could take years. I mean, that's a problem. It could take years, because we are trying to do this more in Poland right now, I would say, and it's not easy. I mean, it's definitely doable, but it takes time, and it also took time in them, because we weren't like this all the time. It's kind of something that has developed over time. We haven't had a framework or word for it. It's kind of a way that I've been doing stuff, and in the beginning, companies trusted us less, because they knew, oh, you are the guys doing campaigns. But now in our company presentation, we can show, oh, you might know us mostly for these kind of, bad stuff things. But actually what we also do is a lot of this. And then we can show, okay, here's the story positive that stuff. We helped. Yeah, the positive. And then they're like, oh, this sounds more balanced. It doesn't sound like I'm just here like having to defend myself. It's like there's actually both some positive stuff and some negative stuff. It's a more interesting conversation. And it's not just a bad thing for them to have this meeting. Whereas I think a lot of companies feel like, oh, here's this NGO again, and they're only negative, and it's just about stakeholder management now. We're just handling them, and you can sense when people are just handling you. It's a weird feeling, and you want to get like underneath that kind of shield and just be like normal people relating to normal people, and then trying to drive forward, some kind of progress with whatever topic you're working with.
Yeah, makes sense. In this kind of vein of, oh, sometimes our campaigns aren't powerful enough because we're just a small thing. I know something I've heard of is Anima has this big war chest, this large pot of money. I mean, I won't say how much it is, but like just such that when you do campaign against a group, so when campaigning against a company, it's much more meaningful. If you're only going to have maybe like tens of thousands of dollars on some marketing spend or like whatever external resources, not that much, but if you have hundreds of thousands, maybe in the low millions, then you're like, companies like, wow, maybe I should just get this over with. Can you talk more about that? Like, should more groups do this? Like, how does Anima think about this?
At least it's something we're thinking more and more about. So I wouldn't say the science is inconclusive or whatever you say. It's not kind of proven that it's very helpful, but at least we tried it. So I can at least speak to it because it's also public. So in Norway, I mean, even though we've had a lot of progress, we are not at the ECC level yet. We don't have the stocking density sorted, which is the second most important part of the ECC. Like there's a breed change and then there's a stocking density part. One of our main targets for getting there is McDonald's. And when we started a McDonald's campaign, or restarted it, whatever, maybe a year back, I can't remember the exact timeline, we were like, okay, so what is the story going to be this time? And then we were like, how about that we state how much money we're going to spend on this campaign? Like, why wouldn't that be a story? Because now we actually decided it could be around 7 million Norwegian kroner, which would be maybe almost like $1 million or something like that, which is a lot in a country of this size. So
it's a lot anywhere, I think.
Yeah, it's a lot anywhere. And still, to me, it's still not so much when you know how much advertising costs and everything. So probably we would like to have 5 times as much, but what is actually the value of this change? But whatever. at least we managed to get this as a headline, and it's not that headline in itself is so powerful that it says 7 million kroner for a campaign, but maybe the alternative would be that it would have been hard for us to even make a headline, because the campaign we had at this point was not that complex or anything. It was just kind of standard, like McDonald's needs to phase out fast growing chickens, and they need to provide better stocking density, more space for the chickens. But at least it was out there, and I think McDonald's responded in a kind of defensive way in the media, being like, well, we don't understand why they're going after us, something like that. And to me, at least, that was an update towards that it has an effect. And I'm kind of imagining, what if we could do this more often and in a bigger way, if we could really pool resources. So it's definitely something we are experiencing more with, also in the UK. We are about to launch a campaign targeting pret-a-manger, however you pronounce it. Pardon my French. Even though I am half French, it's still hard for me sometimes. And in that campaign, we are also committing like £1 million, and I think that will be part of the story. It's at least part of what we are telling the company, that we're ready to spend that amount, and possibly even more if it has to drag on. And we're also telling them, like, we're in for the long haul. And I think that's important, because I think otherwise they might think that, oh, what is a campaign? They just look up in a dictionary, or they look up at, oh, there was a campaign back then, and then there was another. Okay, so we have been selected for a 3-month campaign. Like, they could easily make that conclusion, but it's hard to make that conclusion if you can see, oh, they're actually putting up a lot of money. But I mean, it still has to be seen whether this in itself is something that tips the scales, or if it's just an extra talking point, in a sense, whenever you do campaigning.
Totally. Yeah. I'm very curious to see how it goes, both in the UK and Norway, if it has to happen. But I guess, like, I really like this for the example you mentioned before of, it's not just the company that sees this, as other companies that see this. You go, okay, if the company doesn't commit and then you do spend it, they go, oh shit, these guys are actually pretty serious. And if they say they're going to spend this, they will, and it's going to be pretty bad. And I think an example is, in the US, there was a big campaign against Our Hotel Hayes, who kind of dropped or weren't progressing their catering commitment. And that was a very large campaign, and lots of resources spent on it. And I think just last week they committed after 2+ years of fighting. And I think that's a great signal for other retailers saying, look, people stuck at this for multiple years. They spent a bunch of time and effort and human labor on this, and it worked. Therefore, you're next. So I like this kind of demonstration effect. I guess to sum up, I'm very excited for groups to almost build up more of a war chest, and even if that means expanding their staff less quickly, but expanding, maybe rather than spending $100,000 on staff, you do that for a campaign war chest. And I think probably you can inflict more damage on the company with that than an extra person. So that's like something I'm excited about more groups doing.
Yeah, good campaigns cost a lot of money, and I think we just need to own up to that and be ready to spend more money on campaigns. I think sometimes the budgets that we have would be laughable if you showed it to like a commercial company that wanted to advertise a product. They would be like, how can you make a campaign like that for this amount? And I think we need to just compensate a bit for that and be like, okay, let's be willing to spend more and really win some stuff.
That was a very interesting whole discussion on fair cop, flexible cop, whatever you want to call it. I think Jan also said maybe pragmatic cop, but like you said, that sounds a bit pompous.
And maybe not even cop, maybe just
exactly, or not even
authentic cop approach to working with companies. But that sounds very weird and boring. So call it whatever you like. Just understand that getting into very specific roles can be weird, because it becomes inauthentic, and I think that in itself is quite bad.
Yeah, exactly. One thing you kind of mentioned is you enjoy playing poker and backgammon and other, similar games. Can you say more about, I guess, why you do this? And I guess the fun element, like, do you think it helps you to campaigning? And do you think more campaigners should try these out?
I mean, since childhood, I've been attracted to these kind of brain games. Started with chess, and then later on in life, backgammon and poker. And I think it's just interesting to get into this idea of how to optimize for winning stuff, how to understand risk reward on a more practical level rather than on a theoretical level, and how to being able to handle losses, how to improve intuitions, all these kind of things. So I think it has a lot of benefits to get into these games and having some kind of framework for thinking about stuff. I think, for instance, a lot of people, they think, oh, if there's only a 15% chance of success, why should we even do it? And I mean, if you've ever played, poker and you see like, oh my God, I was 85% favorite and I still lost. It was painful. And you'd be like, oh, that 15% is quite good actually. So being able to take some chances and understanding why is important, but also understanding the whole concept of, how scary is our organization when we say we want to launch a campaign? How many chips do we hold at the table? I did a whole presentation around this at the CARE conference, kind of illustrating it. Like if we're asking for something small, then maybe we are powerful, but if we're asking for something big, we're not as powerful as we would like to think. So I think there are many things to this, and I think also just kind of exercising your brain around these concepts is helpful in itself. And if we can have like a common framework of talking about these issues, I think that's helpful also.
A much more amateur aficionado of both those games, poker and backgammon. And yeah, I think there's something you kind of develop, which is, at least I've heard, I haven't experienced this, I haven't played that much poker, is, after playing maybe hundreds or thousands of hands, you develop this intuition for, when you should pull and maybe like fold and kind of pull out because you don't have good probability, or you should double down, or even when someone's bluffing. So I think you kind of develop this intuition for when you should go big or pull out, or like trying to like figure out people's social cues. So yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. You just like develop good judgment over time, and that seems like something that probably does help with corporate engagement.
Yes, and another thing also, which I think a lot of people get wrong, maybe in life in general, is people are guided by what happened, and whatever happened meant that this was the right or the wrong thing to do. So I mean, understanding that you can make a mistake and still get away with it and win, or understand that you could actually do the completely good thing and lose. And
Yes.
having tried that multiple times, being like, okay, so maybe more people are familiar with poker, so maybe that's a better thing to like. You did a horrible thing, and for some reason you got called and you had a really weak hand, but then on the river you just hit the right card and you won. Then if you don't tell yourself, oh, this was a really horrible, move that I made, I should correct it. But if you're like, oh, but I won, so it must have been correct. It's kind of the equivalent. Like if I went to a company and I just, did a very long, boring presentation about the biology of chickens and blah, 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 blah. And then the company, for some reason, they signed up to the ECC. And I'm like, whoa, it's really good to talk about the biology of chickens. But maybe that was not the reason. It was just because for some reason they had a CEO who wanted to do it anyway. And I didn't increase the chances. Maybe I did the opposite. But if you don't stop yourself sometimes and be like, oh, what we're doing, optimizing for winning, and it's not only based on the results, the end results, but you can also like read the room and see, am I doing something now that is helping advancing the stuff, or am I just being lucky right now? Like having these kind of concepts is very, very helpful if you want to improve your game.
Totally, yeah. I like this idea of being more process oriented. And did you make the right decisions? And would you make those decisions again, rather than yes, you just by chance happen to work out well. And yeah, you shouldn't kind of be too happy with that scenario. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Is there anything else you do or would recommend others do to try to develop, better judgment or intuition around things like campaigning or advocacy?
I think just developing your intuition and having a higher trust in your intuition is very important. It's very hard to learn, I think, but I think we've all, had experiences in life that can help us. Like to me, also being a parent and having had to deal with a lot of difficult stuff has helped me enormously, putting myself in the other person's shoes and really having the finger on the pulse, understanding what's going on. I think, a lot of people have had, difficult experiences in life that we can actually learn from and become better at reading the room, like building up higher, confidence in ourselves, so we can actually get into the room and be like, on the one hand, feeling like we know what's going on and we know what's important, but on the other hand, also like really being able to both feel yourself and feel the other person in the room, like without having that ability. If you can only, like, again, using the poker analogy, if you only see your own cards in your hand, like you play a horrible game of poker, you have to see the other person, you have to understand and being able to empathize and sympathize to kind of keep building that skill because it's not just a skill of persuasion. I don't like to go into a room thinking I have to persuade the other person. It's more like I want to understand the other person. I want to be truth seeking. I think like sometimes people might go into this word being how do I handle these objections? Oh, I just cherry pick some research or like, okay, maybe it doesn't cost so much to increase broiler welfare, but actually being truth seeking and being like, yeah, it's true, it's quite expensive, and knowing what it is and not trying to hide it if it is, but still understanding why this is a problem for the company and speak to that. I think that will improve both the way they see you, but also the probabilities of eventually succeeding with whatever you're doing.
I agree. Like, it's both very hard to develop good judgment intuition, but I also think it's incredibly important because I think ultimately many of our jobs kind of revolve on this. Maybe for me, it's I have to develop some judgment of will a group be able to achieve what they're saying and they're trying in a new context. Maybe for you, it's judging whether like how true is this company's excuses, like are they actually trying, like will they fold, all this kind of stuff. And similar to poker, I guess I've gone into the habit of trying to make more bets with people. If we disagree on something, I'll just say, let's bet, and we'll say whoever loses has to give $10 to the Shrimp Welfare Project, and we'll bet on this thing. And I think it's a nice way of seeing, do you have kind of true or good beliefs around the world? And
you want to be accurate when you can lose something. This is also why I think it's good to play these kind of games where there's something at stake, whether that be rating points or like pocket money, whatever. But it has to hurt a little bit. Otherwise, it's hard for you to improve it. If everything is just in a sense for fun, if you don't feel some pain when when you don't win a campaign, like where's that hunger gonna come from actually making the change? So having this kind of competitive mindset without being a jerk, I think that's helpful. I don't know if it's helpful for everyone, but I think it's helpful for a lot of people, at least for myself.
Totally. No, I find that, and yeah, I totally agree with that. If otherwise you just say one thing and then something else happens and you go, oh, I actually said something different, and it's kind of like never immortalized. Whereas if you make a bet and put money on the line, both parties will remember exactly what was said. So yeah, this has been a very fun conversation. And before we close, we always have kind of three kind of classic closing questions. The first one is, what's one bit of news you're excited about or grateful to hear recently?
I mean, obviously, the whole thing that happened in Norway that we talked about, that to me is like proof that we can make these changes, even if it sometimes takes 5 or 10 years time, which is a bit painful in itself. But it's like it's possible to do these monumental shifts. I think you also mentioned the whole delays campaign in the US. I think it's very important that it actually happened, that some resolution was found, because this, in the best case scenario, at least, it could pave the way for more retailers starting to implement, because that has been kind of the Achilles heel in the US campaign for cage free. And the thing is, if the US is not able to go cage free, I mean, how is it going to happen in the rest of the world? I mean, we should be able to crack that nut.
Yeah.
So I think to me that was kind of a relief. I don't know all the minor details, like if this was the best possible outcome that came with like the steps they're gonna take, but it was definitely in the better end. So I'm hoping that we will see more of this. So it's in a time where we don't see too many good news. I'm even more happy when it finally happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's two big wins, both in Norway and in the US. Yeah, I agree. It's been a good couple of weeks. Do you have any media recommendations for listeners? Books, articles, podcasts that kind of helped informed your thinking and you encourage others to read?
Yeah, it's a tough question for me, because I feel I'm quite deep in the trenches in the sense of just doing trial error and learning from real life. I don't think there are that many good resources out with the specific work that I do. Not to say that I've combed through everything and I know it, and I'm not the best reader myself. I used to be more many years back, and now I'm just more like in the trenches. I think I read a book called Never Split the Difference that I found helpful at the time about negotiation. I think it has some interesting concepts, and it aligned quite a lot with like some of the thinking I had myself. I don't know if I read it today, if I would love it the same, but at least I think it could be helpful for people. But then apart from that, I think finding ways also just to calm your mind is sometimes good. So whether that be meditation, music, or even to me, like some of these brain games just helps me like stimulate my brain, but also like gets my brain away from all this serious, like, oh, we need to win this and that. And then it's like, oh, this is simple stuff. I'm moving some checkers around. And I mean, to me, that in a weird way, it's both relaxing and challenging at the same time. So that works for me. And maybe other people have other things, whether that be painting or running or swimming, or like just also knowing that it's not all about learning all the time. Maybe learning can happen while you do the work, and then maybe some unlearning or some relaxation is also equally important to balance your own life.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's good to have a life outside of the world. And again, it kind of goes back to us with animal stuff. You can also empathize more with other people. You meet someone, you go, oh, hey, you like this thing. I also like this thing.
Having a life is good.
Yeah, it's a controversial opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, the final thing is, how can people follow either you or Anima's work? What are the best places to do so?
Probably our website, animainternational.org. That would also be a place if people want to, find job postings, they can find it there. I mean, we are also present on social media, so I think people can just look for Anima or Anima International brands. We are in 6 different countries, so at least we cover some area of the listeners here, but we are European based for the time being.
Nice, very cool. Well, Toby, thanks. This has been super interesting to, I guess, learn more about this approach and I guess hear about the amazing wins it's kind of led to in Norway and other places. So yeah, thanks so much for both for taking time and for all the amazing work you guys do.
Well, thank you, James. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, very good.